Sometimes the people who know you least are the ones who should know you best. Tonight, my father would learn that lesson the hard way, right in the middle of carving the Sunday roast. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the dining room of my childhood home in Westchester County, the same home where I'd grown up listening to lectures about success and failure over countless family dinners. My mother, Linda, had outdone herself with the pot roast, setting the mahogany table with her best china, the kind reserved for special occasions and family guilt trips. I'd made the drive up from Manhattan specifically for this dinner, knowing full well it would turn into another interrogation about my life choices. At 28, I was apparently still a disappointment to my father, Richard Blackwell, a successful insurance executive who measured worth exclusively in salary figures and job titles. My younger brother Jake was already there when I arrived, his BMW parked in the circular driveway next to Dad's Lexus. Jake worked at a prestigious law firm downtown, the kind of career path that made our father beam with pride during his golf club conversations. "Ruby, sweetheart," Mom greeted me at the door, her embrace warm but tinged with the nervous energy that always preceded these family gatherings. "Your father's been asking about your work situation again." I forced a smile, hanging my coat in the familiar entryway closet. I'm sure he has. The dining room conversation started pleasantly enough. Jake shared stories about his latest case, Mom updated us on her book club, and Dad held court with anecdotes from his recent business trip to Chicago. I contributed where appropriate, carefully steering away from any topics related to my professional life. But Dad had never been one to let sleeping dogs lie. "So, Ruby," he said, pausing mid-slice through the roast, "are you still working at that little startup? What do they call it again?" "TechFlow Solutions," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "And yes, I'm still there." Jake looked up from his plate, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Mom's fork clinked nervously against her water glass. "TechFlow Solutions," Dad repeated, shaking his head. "Sounds like one of those fly-by-night operations. How many employees do they have now? 10? 15? "We're at about 45 people currently," I said, cutting my meat with perhaps more force than necessary. 45, he scoffed. "Ruby, you have a master's degree from Columbia. You could be working at Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, any number of real companies. Instead, you're wasting away at some tech company that probably operates out of a garage." "Actually, we have a full floor in a building in Soho," I corrected. "Soho," he laughed, as if the neighborhood itself was proof of my poor judgment. "Listen, honey, I know you think you're being innovative or whatever, but at some point you need to face reality. These startup jobs, they're not real careers. They're hobbies for people who can't handle the corporate world." My mother shot him a warning look. "Richard, please." "No, Linda, someone needs to say it. Look at Jake. He's got a real job, real security, real prospects. Ruby's playing around with computers like she's still in college." The familiar burn of frustration rose in my chest. This wasn't the first time we'd had this conversation, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. In my father's world, success meant corner offices, expense accounts, and names he recognized from the Wall Street Journal. "Dad, I'm not playing around. I'm the Chief Technology Officer. I oversee our entire development team and our product roadmap." "Chief Technology Officer," he repeated mockingly, "at a company nobody's ever heard of. Ruby, you could be a Chief Technology Officer at your friend Sarah's lemonade stand. The title doesn't mean anything if the company isn't legitimate." Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Even he seemed to think Dad was going too far tonight. "What do you even do there?" Dad continued, warming to his theme. "I mean, specifically, what is your actual daily contribution to society?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "We develop software solutions for financial institutions. We help banks and investment firms streamline their operations and improve their customer experience." "Software solutions," he said dismissively. "That's a fancy way of saying you make phone apps." "Richard, that's enough," Mom interjected, her voice carrying more authority than usual. is it, though? Is it enough? Dad leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to what I recognized as his tough love face. Ruby, I love you. We all love you. But you're 28 years old, and you're still chasing this fantasy of being the next Steve Jobs or whatever. Meanwhile, your college friends are buying houses, starting families, and building real wealth. Some of my colleagues have done quite well for themselves, I said quietly.
Colleagues? He snorted. You mean the other kids in hoodies who think they're going to change the world with their MacBooks? The irony wasn't lost on me. If he only knew what tomorrow would bring, what the stack of papers locked in my office safe represented, what the endless meetings with lawyers and investment bankers had been building toward. Dad, you don't understand the tech industry. It's not the same as insurance or traditional corporate jobs. The potential is different. Potential, he repeated. Ruby, I've been in business for 35 years. You know what I've learned? Potential doesn't pay the bills. Potential doesn't build retirement accounts. Potential is what failed entrepreneurs talk about when they're moving back in with their parents. Mom had stopped eating entirely, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Jake was studying his plate like it contained the secrets of the universe. Look, Dad continued, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to be realistic. You're smart, you're talented, you're hardworking, but you're also naive about how the world works. These tech startups fail 90% of the time. Even the ones that don't fail, most of them just get bought out by bigger companies for pennies on the dollar. Some of them do quite well, I said, thinking of the conversations I'd had with our investment bankers just last week. Some of them, he agreed. The exceptions, the lottery winners. But you can't build a life plan around being the exception, Ruby. You need to think about stability, about your future, about what happens when this little adventure runs out of money. The words stung because they echoed fears I'd had myself during the early days at TechFlow. The 60-hour weeks, the uncertain paychecks, the constant pressure to prove ourselves in a crowded market. There had been nights when I'd wondered if Dad was right, if I was just another delusional 20-something with an MBA and unrealistic expectations. Besides, Dad added, reaching for the wine bottle, what kind of company makes their employees work on Sundays? You said you had to take calls earlier today. That's not a healthy work-life balance. I hadn't mentioned any calls, but I let it slide. The truth was, I had fielded several calls today, but they hadn't been about problems or crisis management. They'd been about preparations, final confirmations, and last-minute coordination for what would be the most important day in TechFlow's 5-year history. Sometimes the work demands flexibility, I said. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about, Dad said triumphantly. Real companies respect their employees' time. Real companies have proper boundaries. This startup culture, it's just exploitation dressed up as innovation. I glanced at my phone, sitting face down beside my napkin. I'd put it on silent for dinner, but I could see the screen lighting up intermittently with messages. My assistant Marcus had probably sent the final schedule for tomorrow's events. The PR team was likely confirming media interviews. The legal team might have last-minute documents to review. What I don't understand, Dad continued, clearly feeling he was making progress, is why you're so stubborn about this. Pride? Is that what this is? Because if it is, that's foolish pride, Ruby. Smart people know when to cut their losses and move on to better opportunities. It's not about pride, I said. Then what is it about? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're afraid to admit that this whole startup thing was a mistake. And the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be to transition to a real career. My phone buzzed against the table. Then again. Then a third time in quick succession. Are you going to answer that? Dad asked sarcastically. Let me guess. Another Sunday emergency at the office that can't wait until Monday? I picked up the phone and glanced at the screen. Marcus had sent 3 messages in the last 2 minutes, each marked urgent. The preview text I could see made my heart skip a beat. Ruby, Mom said gently, maybe you should take it if it's important. Dad rolled his eyes. Everything's important at these places. That's how they justify paying people nothing. They make them feel indispensable. I stood up from the table, phone in hand. I'll just be a minute. Of course you will, Dad muttered. This is exactly what I'm talking about. No boundaries, no respect for personal time. As I walked toward the kitchen for privacy, I could hear him launching into another lecture for Jake, another about how real professionals didn't take business calls during family dinner. If he only knew what kind of call I was about to take. I stepped into the kitchen, closing the door behind me and leaning against the granite countertop where I'd done homework as a teenager. The familiar space felt surreal given what I suspected these messages might contain. Marcus's texts were stacked on my screen. Ruby, need to talk ASAP about tomorrow's timeline. SEC approval came through an hour ago. We're officially green. Media requests flooding in. CNN wants live interview at 9 a.m.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed his number. Marcus picked up on the first ring. "Ruby, thank God! Where are you? I've been trying to reach you for 20 minutes. I'm at my parents' house for dinner. What's happening?" Everything's happening. The SEC gave final approval at 4:47 p.m. today. We're officially going public tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. sharp. The opening price is set at $42 per share. The number hit me like a physical blow, $42. I owned 2.3 million shares of TechFlow Solutions stock, accumulated over 5 years of reduced salaries, reinvested bonuses, and employee stock option programs. Simple math, $96,600,000. "Ruby, are you still there?" "I'm here," I managed. 42? The underwriters were confident. Goldman's lead analyst called it the most anticipated fintech IPO of the decade. Pre-market orders are already 3 times oversubscribed. Through the kitchen door, I could hear Dad's voice continuing his lecture about responsible career choices and the importance of job security. The irony was so thick, I almost laughed. "What else do I need to know?" I asked, forcing myself to focus. "NASDAQ ceremony is at 8 a.m. You'll ring the opening bell with the executive team. After that, we have back-to-back interviews, CNN, CNBC, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal. The PR team arranged a car to pick you up at 6 a.m. sharp." I glanced at my reflection in the kitchen window. Tomorrow morning, I would be standing in Times Square, ringing the opening bell as Chief Technology Officer of a publicly traded company worth an estimated $3 billion. "Marcus, I need you to keep this absolutely quiet until the market opens. No leaks, no early celebrations, nothing." Of course, the whole team's under strict NDAs. "Ruby, this is it. Everything we've worked for the past 5 years." "I know. I'll see you bright and early tomorrow." I hung up and stood in the kitchen for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. 5 years ago, when I joined TechFlow as one of their first employees, it had been a leap of faith. The company was 8 people working out of a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, surviving on ramen noodles and venture capital fumes. Our breakthrough had come 18 months ago when we developed an artificial intelligence system that could predict market fluctuations with unprecedented accuracy. Every major bank on Wall Street wanted our technology. Goldman Sachs had signed a $100 million licensing deal. JP Morgan Chase had followed with an even larger contract. The kitchen door opened and Mom peeked in. "Everything okay, sweetheart? You've been in here for a while." "Everything's fine, Mom. Just some coordination for tomorrow." She stepped fully into the kitchen, closing the door behind her. "Ruby, I want you to know that your father doesn't mean to be so harsh. He worries about you." "I know he does. He sees how hard you work, how much stress you're under. He just wants you to have the security he never had growing up." I nodded, understanding the truth in her words. Dad had grown up poor in Detroit, working his way through college and building his insurance business from nothing. Security meant everything to him because he'd lived without it. "Mom, what if I told you that everything Dad's worried about is about to change?" She studied my face carefully. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if the company isn't the risky venture he thinks it is? What if we've actually built something significant?" "Ruby, are you trying to tell me something?" Before I could answer, Jake appeared in the doorway.
Dad's getting restless. He wants to know if you're planning to rejoin dinner or if TechFlow is having another emergency. The three of us returned to the dining room where Dad was refilling his wine glass and looking pointedly at his watch. 23 minutes, he announced. 23 minutes of family dinner interrupted by work. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Ruby. I sat down and picked up my fork. Sorry about that. It was important. I'm sure it was. Let me guess. The website crashed, the app isn't working, someone's computer stopped functioning? Richard warned. No, I'm curious. What kind of earth-shattering emergency requires immediate attention on a Sunday evening at a 40-person company?
I chewed slowly, considering my response. In less than 14 hours, every business news channel in the country would be talking about TechFlow solutions. Dad would see my face on CNBC, watch me ring the opening bell, read about our valuation in the Wall Street Journal. It was coordination for a big announcement tomorrow, I said finally. What kind of announcement? Jake asked, genuinely interested. A business announcement, something we've been working toward for a long time. Dad set down his wine glass. Ruby, please don't tell me you're launching another app or some other gadget nobody needs. The market is already flooded with... It's not an app, I interrupted. Then what is it? A website redesign? A new logo? What kind of announcement requires Sunday emergency calls? I looked around the table at my family. Mom's expression was curious and supportive. Jake seemed intrigued. Dad looked skeptical and vaguely annoyed. We're going public tomorrow morning. The words hung in the air like smoke. Dad's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Jake's eyebrows shot up. Mom's hand flew to her chest. Going public? Dad repeated slowly. As in the stock market? As in the New York Stock Exchange. Well, NASDAQ technically. We're listing tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Dad set down his fork entirely. Ruby, that's not possible. Companies that go public are established corporations with hundreds of millions in revenue. They're not little startups with 40 employees. We have 312 employees now, actually, and last year our revenue was $267 million. Jake whistled low under his breath. Mom was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. 267 million? Dad's voice had lost its mocking tone. Ruby, that can't be right. Our AI trading platform processes about $15 billion in transactions daily across 17 major financial institutions. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, they're all clients. The dining room had gone completely silent, except for the antique grandfather clock ticking in the corner. Dad was doing mental calculations, his business mind trying to process what I just told him. If that's true, he said slowly, then your company is worth... The underwriters set our initial valuation at $3 billion. The opening price tomorrow is $42 per share. Dad leaned back in his chair like he'd been physically pushed. $3 billion? Ruby, Mom whispered, what does this mean for you personally? This was the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. I own about 2.5 million shares. Do the math. Jake grabbed his phone and started typing. 2.5 million times 42. His eyes widened. Ruby, that's over $100 million. The number seemed to echo in the room. Dad was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been respect. $100 million, he repeated softly. Give or take, I said. Of course, there are lockup periods and tax implications, but yes, that's the general neighborhood. Dad looked down at his plate, then back at me, then back at his plate. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Ruby, I had no idea. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Dad stared at his untouched mashed potatoes, while Mom fidgeted with her napkin. Jake had put his phone down, but kept glancing between me and Dad, clearly unsure how to navigate this sudden shift in family dynamics. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. Ruby, I need to understand something. When you said you were the Chief Technology Officer, I assumed it was one of those inflated startup titles. It's not inflated.
I've been with TechFlow since the beginning. I built our core platform architecture, recruited the entire engineering team, and hold 17 patents on our trading algorithms. He rubbed his temples, a gesture I recognized from my childhood when he was trying to process complex insurance claims. 17 patents? Artificial intelligence applications for financial markets. Our system can predict market movements with 87% accuracy up to 6 hours in advance. That's why Goldman Sachs signed an exclusive licensing deal worth $100 million.
Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Honey, why didn't you ever tell us how successful the company was becoming? Because nobody asked about the details. Every conversation about my job turned into a lecture about getting a real career. It was easier to let you think what you wanted to think. Dad winced at that, clearly recognizing the truth in my words. But Ruby, a company worth $3 billion, doesn't just happen overnight. This must have taken years to build. 5 years, 2 months, and 16 days to be exact. We started with 8 people in a warehouse. I was the 3rd employee hired. Jake leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Walk me through this. How did you go from 8 people to a $1 billion IPO? I appreciated his directness. It gave me something concrete to focus on besides Dad's stunned expression. The first 2 years were brutal. We were developing trading software, but so was everyone else. We were running out of money, working 100-hour weeks, sleeping on air mattresses in the office. I remember one month where I ate nothing but peanut butter sandwiches because I'd put my entire paycheck back into the company to help with rent. Mom's face tightened with concern, probably imagining her daughter starving in some downtown office. But we had something different. While other companies were trying to automate existing trading strategies, we were creating entirely new ones. Our AI doesn't just follow market trends, it predicts them by analyzing patterns across thousands of variables that human traders can't process simultaneously. What kind of variables? Dad asked, his business instincts engaging despite his shock. Everything. News sentiment, social media trends, weather patterns, shipping routes, political poll fluctuations, satellite imagery of retail parking lots. Our system processes about 400,000 data points per second to identify patterns that predict market movements. What kind of variables? Dad asked, his business instincts engaging despite his shock. Everything. News sentiment, social media trends, weather patterns, shipping routes, political poll fluctuations, satellite imagery of retail parking lots. Our system processes about 400,000 data points per second to identify patterns that predict market movements. What kind of variables? Dad asked, his business instincts engaging despite his shock. Everything. News sentiment, social media trends, weather patterns, shipping routes, political poll fluctuations, satellite imagery of retail parking lots. Our system processes about 400,000 data points per second to identify patterns that predict market movements. Dad sat back in his chair. That's actually brilliant. The breakthrough came 2 years ago when we predicted the collapse of Meridian Financial 3 days before it happened. Our system detected unusual patterns in their trading activity, cross-referenced it with executive social media behavior, and flagged it as a high-risk investment. Our clients who followed our recommendation saved over $2 billion. $2 billion, Jake whistled. That's when Goldman Sachs came knocking, then JP Morgan, then every major bank on Wall Street. They weren't just buying our software, they were buying our competitive advantage. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my email. Actually, let me show you something. I found the message I was looking for and handed the phone to Dad. That's from the CEO of Deutsche Bank. He sent it last month. Dad read aloud. Ruby, your team's market prediction accuracy has increased our quarterly profits by 43%. The board is prepared to discuss an exclusive European licensing deal worth up to $300 million. He looked up at me. $300 million for European rights alone? We turned it down. We're developing our own European division instead. Should be operational by next spring. Mom shook her head in amazement. Ruby, all those late nights, all those weekends you said you were working, you were building this empire.
Empire might be overstating it, but yes, every 18-hour day, every missed family gathering, every time you worried I was wasting my potential, I was actually building something that would change how financial markets operate. Dad was quiet for a long moment, processing everything I told him. When he spoke, his voice had a quality I rarely heard: uncertainty. Ruby, I owe you an apology, not just for tonight, but for years of not taking your work seriously. Dad, you couldn't have known. No, that's not an excuse. I should have asked more questions. I should have tried to understand what you were actually doing instead of dismissing it because it didn't fit my definition of a traditional career. He paused, looking directly at me for the first time since my revelation. I've spent 35 years in business, and I've never heard of anyone your age accomplishing what you've described. Hell, I've never heard of anyone at any age building something like this. Jake was scrolling through his phone. Ruby, I'm looking at financial news sites. There are articles from last week calling TechFlow's IPO the most anticipated tech offering since Facebook. How did I not know my own sister was about to become one of the richest people in the country? The weight of that statement hit me. One of the richest people in the country. It sounded absurd when applied to the same person who used to get allowance money for cleaning bathrooms in this house.
It doesn't feel real yet, I admitted. Tomorrow morning, I'll ring the opening bell at NASDAQ, but honestly, it feels like it's happening to someone else. Mom stood up and walked around the table to hug me from behind. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart, not because of the money, but because you believed in yourself when nobody else did. Dad cleared his throat again. Ruby, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. When I was giving you grief earlier about your dead-end job and suggesting you get a real career, what were you thinking? I considered his question carefully. I was thinking that in about 12 hours, you were going to see me on every business news channel in the country, and maybe then you'd understand that I knew what I was doing. He nodded slowly. That must have been incredibly frustrating, having your own father question your judgment when you were sitting on information like this. It was, but I also understood why you were concerned. From the outside, it probably did look like I was wasting my education on some risky venture. But you weren't. You were building something extraordinary. He paused. Ruby, what happens next? After tomorrow, I mean. We keep growing. The IPO gives us capital to expand internationally, develop new products, maybe acquire some smaller competitors. This isn't the end goal, it's just the beginning of the next phase. Jake was still reading articles on his phone. It says here that 3 other major banks are in bidding wars for exclusive licensing deals with TechFlow. Ruby, you're not just successful, you're disrupting an entire industry. That's the plan. Traditional trading is based on human intuition and outdated analytical models. We're proving that artificial intelligence can outperform even the most experienced traders consistently. Dad stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his perfectly manicured suburban lawn. You know what the strangest part of this is? I spent dinner lecturing you about job security and building wealth for retirement. Meanwhile, you've already built enough wealth to retire 100 times over. I'm not planning to retire anytime soon, I said. I love what I do. Tomorrow isn't about cashing out. It's about having the resources to do even bigger things. He turned back to face me. What kind of bigger things? We're working on expanding beyond trading. Healthcare diagnostics, climate modeling, urban planning, artificial intelligence applications that could solve real-world problems. The financial success gives us the freedom to tackle projects that might not be immediately profitable, but could have massive social impact. For the first time all evening, Dad smiled. Not the patronizing smile he'd been wearing during his lectures, but a genuine expression of admiration. Ruby Blackwell, he said, shaking his head, my daughter, the technology mogul. The rest of dinner passed in a surreal blur. Dad peppered me with questions about market cap calculations, employee stock options, and regulatory compliance. Mom kept shaking her head and muttering $3 billion under her breath. Jake that pulled up TechFlow's website on his phone and was reading our company mission statement aloud like he was discovering a family secret. Listen to this, Jake said, scrolling through our About page. Founded in 2020 by visionary entrepreneurs committed to revolutionizing financial technology through advanced artificial intelligence. He looked up at me. You're literally listed as co-founder and chief technology officer. Technically, I'm listed as co-founder because I joined so early and contributed core intellectual property, but Marcus Chen was the actual founder. He had the initial vision and secured our first round of venture funding. Dad had moved his chair closer to mine, completely abandoning any pretense of eating. Tell me about this Marcus. Is he the one who called earlier? No, that was Marcus Williams, my executive assistant. Marcus Chen is our CEO. He's the one who'll be standing next to me tomorrow morning when we ring the bell. Two Marcuses? Mom asked, finally contributing to the conversation after spending 20 minutes in stunned silence. It gets confusing sometimes. Marcus Chen goes by MC in the office. He's a Stanford MBA who previously worked at McKinsey. Brilliant strategic mind, terrible at explaining technical concepts to investors. That's usually my job. Jake was now deep in a Google search rabbit hole. Ruby, there are dozens of articles about you specifically. Forbes has you listed as one of their 30 under 30 in technology from 3 years ago. There's a profile in Wired magazine calling you the architect of algorithmic trading's future. I cringe slightly. The media attention has been intense, especially since we announced the IPO filing last month. Last month? Dad's eyebrows shot up. This has been public knowledge for a month? The SEC filing was public, yes. Most people don't read SEC filings unless it's their job, but financial journalists definitely noticed. He pulled out his own phone, typing rapidly. I'm Googling TechFlow IPO right now. Ruby, there are hundreds of articles. Bloomberg, Reuters, Wall Street Journal, everybody's been covering this. I know. Our PR team has been managing interview requests for weeks. Tomorrow, I'm scheduled for live appearances on CNN, CNBC, and Bloomberg Television between the market opening and noon. Mom looked concerned. Sweetheart, are you ready for that kind of attention? Television interviews about billions of dollars? I've been preparing for months. We hired a media coach, practiced with mock interviews, and worked with the PR team on key messaging. It's actually not that different from presenting to investors, just with cameras. Dad was still scrolling through articles on his phone, his expression growing more amazed by the minute. Ruby, listen to this headline from last week's Wall Street Journal. TechFlow Solutions set to dominate AI trading market post-IPO. They're calling you and this Marcus guy the most influential fintech innovators since the creation of electronic trading. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on any of us. 3 hours ago, Dad had been lecturing me about getting a real job at a real company. Now he was reading articles that positioned me as an industry leader reshaping global finance. There's more, Jake added, looking up from his own phone. Fast Company did a deep dive on your company culture last month. According to this, TechFlow has the highest employee satisfaction ratings in the tech industry, and you personally have a 97% approval rating from your engineering team. We work hard to maintain good relationships with our people. Happy employees build better products. Dad set his phone down and looked directly at me. Ruby, I need to ask you something else. When you were growing up, did you always know you wanted to do something like this? I considered his question carefully. Not specifically, but I always loved solving complex problems, and I was fascinated by patterns, mathematical patterns, behavioral patterns, market patterns. I remember being 12 years old and asking you why stock prices moved the way they did. I remember that, he said softly. You wanted to know if there was a formula for predicting what would happen next. You told me that markets were too complex for simple formulas, that they were driven by human emotions and unpredictable events. I was wrong about that, too, he admitted. You weren't entirely wrong. Human emotions and unpredictable events do drive markets, but our AI is sophisticated enough to recognize patterns in those emotions and events that humans can't see. We're not eliminating the human element, we're just processing it more efficiently. Mom had been quiet for the past few minutes, but now she spoke up. Ruby, what does this mean for our family? I mean, practically speaking. It was a fair question, and one I'd been thinking about as the IPO date approached. It means I can finally do some things I've been wanting to do for a long time. Remember how you and Dad always talked about taking that trip to Europe, but never felt like you could afford to leave the business for that long? Dad nodded. Well, now you can. First class, luxury hotels, private tours, whatever you want, my treat. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Ruby, that's very generous, but we don't need. Mom, I'm going to have more money than I can spend in several lifetimes. Sharing it with the people I love isn't generosity, it's joy. Jake grinned. Does this mean you're going to pay off my law school loans? Already planned on it, along with upgrading you to a better apartment and probably buying you a car that doesn't require monthly repairs. Dad was shaking his head again, but this time he was smiling. 6 months ago, I was worried about whether you were contributing enough to your 401k. Now you're talking about paying for European vacations and law school debt like it's pocket money. The scale is definitely surreal, I agreed. Yesterday, I was comparing shopping for groceries. Tomorrow, I'll be worth more than some small country's GDP. My phone buzzed with another message from Marcus. I glanced at the screen and saw a photo attachment. What is it? Jake asked. I opened the message and found a picture of the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. The building's massive digital display showed the TechFlow logo and IPO tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. in bright letters visible from blocks away. I turned my phone so the family could see the image. That's Times Square right now. Mom gasped. Dad leaned forward to get a better look. Jake grabbed the phone to examine it more closely. Ruby, Dad said quietly, your company logo is on a billboard in Times Square. Several billboards, actually. The marketing team went all out. This is really happening, Mom whispered. Tomorrow morning, you're going to be on national television, ringing the bell to start trading on a company worth billions of dollars. The reality of it hit me fresh. Tomorrow morning, I will wake up as a private citizen. By noon, I would be a public figure, photographed and interviewed and analyzed by financial experts around the world.
I should probably head home soon, I said, checking the time on my phone. Car service picks me up at 6 a.m., and I want to get some sleep before what's going to be the longest day of my life. Dad stood up and walked around the table to where I was sitting. Ruby, before you go, I need to say something. I looked up at him, unsure what to expect. I've been your father for 28 years, and I thought I knew who you were. Tonight, I realized I've been completely blind to your actual capabilities and accomplishments. That's not your fault, that's mine. I'm sorry for not seeing your potential, for not supporting your choices, and for making you feel like you had to hide your success from your own family. He paused, his voice becoming more emotional than I'd ever heard it. But mostly, I'm sorry for wasting so many dinners talking about what you should be doing instead of celebrating what you were already achieving. You've built something extraordinary, and you did it despite my doubts, not because of my support. That's going to bother me for a long time. I stood up and hugged him, feeling 5 years of tension and frustration dissolve between us. Dad, I love you. Your concerns came from wanting me to be secure and successful. You couldn't have known that I already was. When we separated, there were tears in his eyes. Tomorrow morning, he said, I'm going to be watching every minute of coverage, telling everyone who will listen that the brilliant woman ringing that bell is my daughter. For the first time in years, I believed him completely. The drive back to Manhattan felt different than usual. The familiar highways and city lights seemed to shimmer with possibility as I processed everything that had happened at dinner. My phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from the executive team, final preparations for tomorrow's ceremony, and last-minute media confirmations. I pulled into the parking garage of my modest Upper East Side apartment building, a one-bedroom place I'd rented 3 years ago when TechFlow finally started paying decent salaries. By this time next month, I'd probably be apartment hunting in a completely different price range. Marcus Williams had sent a detailed schedule for the morning. Car pickup at 6 a.m. sharp, arrival at NASDAQ by 7:15, final prep meetings with the executive team, then the opening bell ceremony at 9:30. The precision of it all felt both exciting and terrifying. My apartment felt strange as I walked through the door. The IKEA furniture, the student loan payment reminders stuck to my refrigerator, the pile of technical journals on my coffee table, all remnants of a life that was about to change fundamentally. I made a mental note to frame those loan payment reminders someday as a reminder of where I'd started. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my small balcony overlooking East 78th Street. The city stretched out below me, millions of lights representing millions of lives. Most of them unaware that tomorrow, a small software company from Soho would reshape how financial markets operated globally. My phone rang. Marcus Chen's name appeared on the screen. "MC," I answered. "Please tell me nothing's gone wrong." "Everything's perfect, Ruby. Too perfect, actually. I'm calling because I can't sleep, and I figured you probably can't either." I laughed, feeling some of the tension released from my shoulders. I'm sitting on my balcony drinking wine and staring at the city, wondering if any of this is real. It's real. The SEC approvals are real. The investor commitments are real. Goldman's backing is real. Tomorrow morning, we're going to ring that bell, and TechFlow becomes a publicly traded company. MC, can I ask you something? When you first started this company, did you ever imagine we'd get here? There was a long pause on his end. Honestly, no. When I was writing the original business plan in my studio apartment 5 years ago, I was hoping we might get acquired by a bigger company for maybe $50 million. The idea that we'd built something worth $3 billion ourselves never even occurred to me. What changed? You did. When you joined the team and started talking about predictive algorithms that could process hundreds of thousands of variables simultaneously, I realized we weren't just building another trading platform. We were creating something that could fundamentally change how markets function. I took a sip of wine, watching a taxi navigate the late-night traffic below. Do you think we're ready for what comes next? Being a public company is going to be completely different from what we've been doing. Ruby, we've built technology that major banks are paying hundreds of millions of dollars to license. We've got a team of the smartest engineers and analysts I've ever worked with. Our revenue growth has been consistent for 3 straight years. If we're not ready now, we never will be. He was right, of course. We'd spent months preparing for this transition with lawyers, accountants, and consultants who specialized in IPO management. Our board of directors included former executives from Goldman Sachs, Microsoft, and IBM. We weren't stumbling into this blindly. MC, what are you most excited about after tomorrow? The European expansion. Having the capital to build development teams in London, Frankfurt, and Zurich means we can compete globally instead of just dominating the American market. What about you?
I thought about my conversation with Dad earlier, about his questions regarding what came next. I'm excited about the moonshot projects. Climate modeling, healthcare diagnostics, urban planning, all the applications for our AI technology that might not be immediately profitable, but could actually make the world better. The board's going to push back on anything that doesn't show clear revenue potential in the first 2 years. Let them push back. That's why we're going public instead of selling to Google or Microsoft. We get to maintain control of our vision and use the capital to pursue projects that matter, not just projects that maximize quarterly earnings. We talked for another 20 minutes about logistics for the morning, final preparations, and our shared amazement at how far we'd come. After hanging up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, trying to mentally prepare for what tomorrow would bring. I thought about calling my college roommate Sarah, who worked as a marketing manager for a pharmaceutical company in Boston. 3 years ago, she gently suggested that I was too smart to be taking risks on startup companies and should consider applying for positions at established corporations. I wondered what she'd think when she saw me on CNBC tomorrow morning. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jake. "Ruby, I can't stop reading articles about tomorrow. Dad is in his study researching your company like he's writing a dissertation. He's printed out 30 pages of financial analysis and stock market projections. I think you broke his brain in the best possible way." I smiled, imagining Dad surrounded by printouts, trying to understand market capitalization formulas and price-to-earnings ratios for a company his daughter had helped build. The same man who'd spent dinner mocking my dead-end job was now deep diving into financial research to comprehend the magnitude of what I'd accomplished. Another message from Jake. Also, Mom called her sister Carol to brag about your success. Aunt Carol apparently hung up on her because she thought Mom was making up stories about you becoming a billionaire. Family dynamics are about to get very interesting. The reality of extended family reactions hadn't even occurred to me. Aunt Carol had always been competitive with Mom, constantly comparing their children's achievements at family gatherings. Tomorrow's news would shift that dynamic permanently. I walked to my bedroom and laid out my outfit for tomorrow. A navy blue suit that our image consultant had recommended, professional but approachable for television interviews. The stylist was meeting me at NASDAQ at 7:30 to handle hair and makeup before the camera started rolling. Setting my alarm for 5 a.m., I tried to quiet my mind enough to get some sleep. Tomorrow would start with ringing the opening bell and end with interviews that would be broadcast to millions of people. Financial analysts would dissect our company's prospects. Investors would bet hundreds of millions of dollars on our future performance. Technology blogs would analyze our competitive advantages. But tonight, I was still Ruby Blackwell from Westchester County, sitting in a modest apartment, wondering how a girl who used to get nervous about high school presentations had ended up preparing to address the global financial markets. My last thought before falling asleep was about Dad's expression when he'd realized what I'd built, the mixture of shock, pride, and regret that had flickered across his face. Tomorrow morning, when he watched me ring that bell, I hoped he'd feel nothing but pride. The alarm would go off in 6 hours, and everything would change forever. But for now, I was exactly where I'd always been, Ruby Blackwell, just trying to build something meaningful in a world that didn't always understand what meaningful looked like until it was staring them in the face on a Times Square billboard. Tomorrow, everyone will understand. The alarm pierced through my restless sleep at exactly 5 a.m. I'd managed maybe 4 hours of actual rest, my mind spinning with anticipation despite my exhaustion. Outside my window, Manhattan was already stirring to life. Garbage trucks rumbling down the street, early commuters heading to subway stations, the city preparing for another day of commerce that would today include TechFlow solutions joining the ranks of publicly traded companies. I showered quickly and put on the navy suit, checking my reflection in the full-length mirror I'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. The woman staring back at me looked professional, confident, ready to address the financial world. It was strange seeing myself as the person who would soon be featured on magazine covers and financial news segments. My phone showed 17 new messages, most from team members expressing excitement and nerves. Our head of engineering had sent a picture of himself at 4:30 a.m. in the office, running final system checks to ensure our trading platform could handle the increased attention. Our CFO had forwarded pre-market analysis showing strong investor interest. Marcus Williams had confirmed the car would arrive in 10 minutes. I grabbed a protein bar and my briefcase, taking one last look around the apartment that had been home during TechFlow's transformation from scrappy startup to Wall Street darling. The pile of technical journals on my coffee table, the second-hand furniture, the framed photo of our original 8-person team from 2020, all artifacts of a chapter that was ending today. The black sedan was waiting outside exactly at 6 a.m., its driver holding a sign with my name. As we pulled away from my building, I watched the familiar streets of my neighborhood pass by, wondering if they'd look different when I returned tonight as a public figure.
"Exciting day, Miss Blackwell," the driver said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "My brother works in finance, and he's been following your company's IPO announcement. Says you folks are going to revolutionize trading." "We're certainly going to try," I replied, touched that even taxi drivers were aware of what we were doing. The drive to Times Square took 25 minutes through light early morning traffic. As we approached the NASDAQ market site, I could see television crews setting up equipment, financial reporters doing sound checks, and early morning tourists gathering to watch the spectacle. The building's massive digital screens displayed the TechFlow logo alongside scrolling text announcing our 9:30 a.m. debut.
Marcus Chen was waiting in the lobby, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit and looking far more composed than I felt. He was deep in conversation with our head of investor relations and two people I didn't recognize, probably additional PR representatives brought in for the media blitz. "Roby," Marcus called out when he saw me. "Perfect timing. Lisa wants to brief us on the interview schedule before we head upstairs." Lisa Martinez, our head of public relations, approached with a tablet full of notes and the focused energy of someone orchestrating a major media event. "Good morning, Ruby. Here's what we're looking at today. CNN interview at 9:45, immediately after the bell ceremony, CNBC at 10:30, Bloomberg Television at 11:15, and the Wall Street Journal wants 15 minutes at noon for their podcast. Fox Business requested a spot, but we're saving that for next week to spread out the coverage." The reality of my schedule hit me. 4 major media appearances before lunch, each one broadcast to millions of viewers, many of whom would be making investment decisions based partly on how I came across on camera. "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked, studying my expression. "Like I'm about to jump out of an airplane without being entirely sure my parachute will work." He laughed. "The parachute's been tested extensively. You've been preparing for this for months, Ruby. You know our technology better than anyone. You understand our competitive advantages, and you've practiced these key messages until you could deliver them in your sleep." Plus, Lisa added, "the early indicators are incredibly positive. Pre-market trading opened an hour ago, and we're already seeing strong demand. Initial price points are tracking above our projections." I tried to process what that meant. If our stock opened above the projected $42 per share, my personal stake would be worth even more than the calculations from last night's dinner conversation. We took the elevator to the 6th floor, where Nasdaq's executive team was waiting to walk us through the bell ringing ceremony. The space was buzzing with activity: camera crews positioning equipment, sound technicians running final tests, financial analysts reviewing last-minute market data. The ceremony preparation was surprisingly formal. We practiced the exact timing of the bell ringing, the positioning for photographs, the brief remarks we'd each make afterward. Marcus would speak first as CEO, followed by me discussing our technology, then our CFO covering financial projections. At 8:15, the hair and makeup artist arrived to prepare me for television. As she worked, I could see through the windows to the street below, where crowds were gathering to watch the ceremony on the building's external screens. Somewhere in that crowd of tourists and financial enthusiasts, history was being made. Not just for TechFlow, but for the entire artificial intelligence industry. "Ruby," Marcus said, sitting down beside me while the makeup artist added final touches, "I want you to know something before we go live. 5 years ago, when I was trying to convince investors to take a chance on our idea, most of them said artificial intelligence in trading was too risky, too unproven. They wanted us to focus on incremental improvements to existing platforms." I remember. That's why we ended up bootstrapping most of our early development. Right, but you never wavered in believing that we could build something genuinely revolutionary. Every time I had doubts, every time investors pushed back, every time competitors said we were chasing impossible technology, you had absolute confidence in what we were creating. He paused, his usual business-focused demeanor becoming more personal. "This IPO isn't just about TechFlow becoming a public company. It's vindication for everyone who believed that artificial intelligence could transform finance, that small teams of brilliant people could out-innovate massive corporations, that taking risks on unproven technology sometimes pays off in extraordinary ways." At 9 a.m., we were escorted to the trading floor balcony overlooking the main Nasdaq trading floor. The energy was electric. Hundreds of traders, analysts, and media representatives preparing for the market opening. Digital displays showed pre-market data for dozens of companies, but TechFlow's ticker symbol, TFLW, was prominently featured on the main screen. Lisa appeared beside us with final updates. "Ruby, pre-market pricing is now at $47 per share. The demand has exceeded even our most optimistic projections." $47. My mental calculation was automatic. 2.3 million shares times $47 equals $108,100,000. Somewhere in Westchester County, Dad was probably watching financial news coverage and doing the same math. The ceremonial belle sat on a podium surrounded by cameras, microphones, and Nasdaq executives. At exactly 9:30 a.m., Marcus and I would ring it together, officially launching TechFlow Solutions into the public markets and transforming our 5-year journey from warehouse startup to billion-dollar corporation. 2 minutes, someone called out. I thought about the girl who'd asked her father about stock market patterns 15 years ago, the Columbia graduate who'd taken a risk on an unknown company, the engineer who'd spent countless nights debugging algorithms that would eventually process billions of dollars in daily transactions. 30 seconds. The cameras were rolling, millions of people were watching, and somewhere in the crowd below, the future of artificial intelligence in finance was about to begin. Marcus looked at me and nodded. Ready to change the world? Ready to change the world? Marcus asked, his hand positioned on one side of the ceremonial bell. I placed my hand next to his, looking out at the sea of cameras, traders, and NASDAQ officials surrounding us. Through the windows, I could see the massive digital displays broadcasting our moment to Times Square below, where hundreds of people had gathered to witness TechFlow's debut. "Let's do this," I replied. At exactly 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we struck the bell together. The metallic clang echoed across the trading floor, officially launching TechFlow Solutions as ticker symbol TFLW on the NASDAQ exchange. Applause erupted from the assembled crowd, camera flashes went off like fireworks, and somewhere in the chaos of celebration, I became a public figure. The digital displays immediately showed our opening trade, $48.50 per share, nearly 15% above our projected launch price. The mathematics hit me instantly. My personal stake had just jumped to over $111 million in the span of 30 seconds. Marcus grabbed my hand and raised it triumphantly as photographers captured the moment. His grin was infectious, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to fully embrace the magnitude of what we'd accomplished. "Ladies and gentlemen," the NASDAQ president announced into a microphone, "please welcome Marcus Chen, CEO, and Ruby Blackwell, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of TechFlow Solutions." The applause continued as Marcus stepped forward to address the crowd. His remarks were polished and confident, thanking investors, acknowledging our team's hard work, and outlining our vision for artificial intelligence in global finance. When he finished, he gestured for me to speak. I approached the microphone, looking out at faces that represented the financial establishment I'd spent 5 years trying to prove wrong. Investment bankers who'd initially dismissed our proposals, technology analysts who'd questioned our algorithms, reporters who'd overlooked us until our revenue numbers became impossible to ignore. 5 years ago, I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. TechFlow was 8 people in a converted warehouse, surviving on venture capital and absolute conviction that artificial intelligence could revolutionize financial markets. Today, we process over $15 billion in daily transactions for the world's largest banks, and our technology has proven that machines can identify market patterns invisible to human analysis. I paused, seeing nods of recognition from several financial journalists in the crowd. But this IPO isn't the end of our story, it's the beginning. With the capital we're raising today, we'll expand globally, develop new applications for our AI technology, and continue pushing the boundaries of what's possible when brilliant people refuse to accept that something can't be done. The applause was thunderous. As I stepped back from the microphone, Lisa materialized beside me with an update. "Ruby, the stock's already up to $51. Trading volume is 3 times higher than we projected. CNN wants to go live in 5 minutes." The next 4 hours passed in a blur of television interviews, each one building on the momentum of our successful debut. The CNN interview focused on our technology and competitive advantages. CNBC wanted to discuss our financial projections and expansion plans. Bloomberg Television dived deep into our artificial intelligence algorithms and their applications beyond trading. Each interviewer asked variations of the same question: how did a small startup from Brooklyn become a billion-dollar company in 5 years? My answer evolved slightly with each telling, but the core remained consistent. Exceptional people working on genuinely innovative technology with the patience to build something sustainable rather than chasing quick exits. During a brief break between interviews, I checked my phone to find dozens of messages from friends, former colleagues, and family members who'd watched the coverage.
Jake had sent a video of Dad sitting in his home office, surrounded by printouts and financial
documents, watching my CNBC interview with the intensity of someone studying for final exams. The message that brought tears to my eyes came from Mom. "Sweetheart, I'm watching you on television explaining artificial intelligence to Wolf Blitzer, and I'm so proud I can barely breathe. You didn't just build a successful company, you became the kind of person who can change entire industries. I love you more than words can express." By 1 p.m., our stock price had stabilized at $52.75 per share, giving TechFlow a market capitalization of just over $3 billion and making my personal stake worth approximately $121 million. The financial media was calling it one of the most successful tech IPOs of the decade. The Wall Street Journal podcast interview was the most substantive conversation of the day, focusing less on our immediate success and more on the long-term implications of AI-driven trading. The host asked thoughtful questions about market stability, regulatory considerations, and the potential societal impacts of algorithmic financial decision-making. "Ms. Blackwell," she said near the end of our conversation, "you're now one of the youngest female executives to lead a company through a billion-dollar IPO. What advice would you give to other young women considering careers in technology?" I thought about my journey from Columbia graduate to CTO, the late nights debugging code, the investor meetings where I was the only woman in the room, the family dinners where my own father questioned my career choices. "Trust your instincts," I said. "When you see a problem that needs solving or an opportunity that others are missing, don't wait for permission to pursue it. The biggest risk isn't failure. It's wondering what might have been if you'd been brave enough to try." After the final interview, Marcus and I retreated to a quiet conference room to decompress. The trading day was ending, and our stock had closed at $53.20, a 27% gain on our first day as a public company. "So," Marcus said, loosening his tie and collapsing into a chair, "how does it feel to be worth over $100 million? "Surreal," I admitted. "This morning, I was worried about my student loan payments. Now I could buy the building where I went to graduate school." "What's the first thing you want to do with the money?" I thought about Dad's expression last night when he'd realized the magnitude of what I'd built, about Mom's proud tears, about Jake's amazement at discovering his sister had become a technology mogul. Take my parents to Europe. First class, luxury hotels, private tours of every museum and historical site they've ever wanted to see. They spent 30 years supporting my education and dreams. Now I get to support theirs. Marcus smiled. "That's very Ruby of you. Most people would say buy a mansion or get a yacht." I'll probably upgrade my apartment at some point, but honestly, the money isn't the most important part of today. The most important part is proving that our technology works, that our vision was correct, and that we built something that will genuinely improve how financial markets operate. My phone buzzed with a call from Dad. I answered immediately. "Ruby," his voice was thick with emotion, "I've been watching you on television all day, and I need to tell you something. I've never been more proud of anyone in my entire life, not just because of the money or the success, but because of how you handled yourself, how you explained complex technology to millions of people, how you represented not just your company, but your entire industry." He paused, and I could hear Mom in the background. "Your mother wants me to tell you that she's been crying happy tears for 6 straight hours, and she's already planning your homecoming dinner for next weekend. She wants to invite everyone we know so they can meet her daughter, the technology mogul." I laughed, imagining Mom orchestrating a celebration dinner with the same enthusiasm she brought to holiday gatherings. "Dad, thank you for watching today. I know this isn't the career path you would have chosen for me, but Ruby," he interrupted, "I was wrong about everything. Your career, your company, your judgment, all of it. You saw something I couldn't see, believed in something I didn't understand, and built something I never thought possible. I'm sorry it took a billion-dollar IPO for me to realize my daughter is a genius." As I hung up the phone and prepared to leave NASDAQ, I reflected on the incredible journey from last night's dinner to this moment. 24 hours ago, I was defending my career choices to a skeptical fodder. Now I was fielding congratulations from financial industry leaders and planning how to use my newfound wealth to benefit the people I loved. The real victory wasn't the money or the media attention. It was the vindication of believing in myself when others couldn't see my potential, of taking risks on unproven technology, of choosing the harder path because it led somewhere extraordinary. Tomorrow, I would wake up in the same apartment, but as a fundamentally different person. Someone who'd proven that small teams with big ideas could reshape entire industries. Someone who'd turned years of doubt and criticism into one of the most successful IPOs in recent memory. But tonight, I was just Ruby Blackwell from Westchester County, driving home through Manhattan traffic, thinking about how sometimes the people who believe in you least are the ones who end up being the most proud when you prove them wrong. The girl who'd once asked her father about stock market patterns had finally found all the answers and built a company worth billions of dollars in the process. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.